Hello and welcome to this episode of the Diary of a Lawyer. And in case you have missed it, it's the around the time of the 75th anniversary of the Windrush generation, a generation of men and women who around 75 years ago set foot on these isles in a little harbor or town called Tilbury in a ship called the Windrush, hence the name the Windrush. Almost 75 years later, that generation of men and women, mainly from the Caribbean, transformed the United Kingdom in many ways across many spectrum, whether it's the economy, national health system, transport, culture, food, and generally the diversity of this country has been immeasurably important. And such is the measure of that the king, to his credit, embraced, attended services. There's a gallery, and was involved and invited and met people and touched flesh for people or relatives or descendants of that generation. But I think among the many articles that I have been reading around this anniversary, and it's fitting that this episode is about these folks and their generation. But among the many articles is one that is by Huigh Muir, who describes himself as associated with the relatives or the parents of that generation. And he writes a moving article in The Guardian, I think it's on the 22nd of June 2023, and the title is "They Survived and Thrived in a Hostile Britain, and That's Why We Revere the Windrush Pioneers." And he goes on to say that docking 75 years ago, they had no idea of the difficulties ahead. He claims the country made nothing easy, and their achievements should be saluted. So I'm going to try to cover as much as what he says, or as close to his own version as possible. And he says that look again at the picture. There's a picture at the Tilbury docks on HMT Empire Windrush, 22nd June 1948, of mainly young men impeccably dressed in suits and hats and ties, and says, look at the picture taken 70 years ago at Tilbury docks. Look at those people as they pose for the historic photographs. Look at their faces, wearied from a month of travel, edged with joy, hope, bewilderment, and lacking stage left just out of sight for boarding. He says, as the descendants of the Windrush generation, they get to look at those faces every day in the pictures of their own families that they hang on the walls and in their front rooms. They have the same posed smiles, the demeanor of all adventurers who smile at the outset of an uncertain journey. There were around 902 of them, and they knew they had to impress and account for themselves. Their attire was pin sharp. Whatever could be said of them on arrival, it was not to be that they were slovenly. They knew enough to show that they came in peace. Some sang and exuded bonhomie for past news, but others interviewed on the day sought to echo the self-effacement and deprecation they saw as essentially English. He goes on to say that they made the best of it, but they didn't know much at all. They'd have to learn much quickly in turbulent decades ahead. He points out the questions that they faced. Where would they live? Around 236 of the men would be bused to the half-light of an underground shelter under Clapham Common in South London. It was dark, a bit damp and cramped, as they had transferred from a ship to the innards of a submarine. But it was English dry land and proximity to labour exchange, brimming with post-war work, offered the springboard that allowed many to rent rooms and buy homes in nearby Brixton, making it the unofficial black capital of Britain and Europe. In time, they would migrate to other big cities where work was available: Birmingham, Manchester, where dock and construction work could be found, and on to Leeds and Nottingham as well. But smiling on the dock, how could they have known about the no blacks, no Irish, no dogs signs to come? The exploitative landlords, the fact that Pete Rackman, known as the worst of them, widely reviled, and rightly so, as king of slum landlords, would become a go-to guy because he at least was willing to let them live in his quality accommodation, albeit at an extortionate cost. The rapacious exploiter as savior, they took what they could get. They didn't know what lay ahead, and they prevailed. They rented rooms, worked hard, and saved cash. My uncle, his uncle, as Huigh Muir, a contractor, who was a bit of a wheeler dealer, he says, helped guys find rooms, bought some houses, rented out more rooms. His dad, who arrived in 1953, stayed in one of them, part of the Caribbean to UK Underground Railroad, until he moved into his own place, and thanks to the carpentry jobs, bought his own. He describes how things moved on very fast, and according to the Imperial Museum, when the first US GIs arrived in Britain in 1942, there are thought to be between 8,000 and 10,000 black people in Britain, scattered mainly around the main ports. But by 1958, as families grew, relatives left behind in the Caribbean were sent for, and others, like his own father, came by sea and air to try their luck. 150,000 had arrived. They helped each other. His dad ran Padna, the unofficial savings scheme where a group of people threw money in the pot, and at the end of the week, one of them received the total for their own use, seed capital for a house full of furniture. People would knock on the door and hand to me, barely a teenager, their contribution to pass on when dad came home from work. And when all the money was in, one of them would come back to collect it all and bounce out smiling about the acquisition or to follow on, or the bill that could finally be paid. Sniffy, distrustful banks weren't an option, so they trusted each other. They came for employment. But what do they know about what would happen at work? Jobs were available and they were ready to graft, but their faces would fit one day and jar the next. There was no employment or discrimination law on the buses until the 1960s. A colour bar patterned on Bristol's buses, or the trains, or at Ford, or on the building site. Not until 1968 did the Race Relations Act become enacted. And so he goes on to describe the various problems they faced, which include housing, employment, and among other things. But he says that they prevailed with a bit of help. The no blacks, no Irish, say the signs, and for those so targeted, it led to camaraderie. And two decades later, when his father retired in traction, having fallen off scaffolding into an as yet waterless pool, he was visiting the hospital, and Tom Norton was there. Everything was new for the first day for them. Most thought a free British schooling system staffed by teachers highly respected bred in the Caribbean would be the least of their worries. Instead, those in London, 1967, found the proportion of their children diverted to ESN schools was almost double in the mainstream schools, 15%. And prevailing on educations remain an objective today, which is shown in the statistics on race disparities within the color system. But back then it took many forms: Saturday supplementary schools in draughty halls in churches, campaigns by black teachers and activists, and left-leaning institutions exposing the discrimination that they faced. And so it goes on. So first was housing, then there's employment, then education. They had to be very inventive to circumnavigate the disadvantage. The campaigns were also micro and macro. They used black teachers and others. He says that his mother, armed with a Bible and a food thermos with children underfoot, staged a day-long sitting directly outside the Director of Education private's office when his sister was allocated a lesser school than merited. The director hunkered down, for who was he to be challenged by a female immigrant? Bashar staffed 8 and raised more patience than him, and a deal of indignation. By day's end, their allocation was changed. It took casteness to prevail. Wow. He goes on to say that how could they ever know that at Tilbury Docks, that the prejudices of those who regretted their presence here would be conveyed by the forces of law and order, meaning the stop and searches and the Vagrancy Act 1822, known as the SAS law, which provided the legal framework focusing on them. He then turns to his childhood when he one day returned from playing football on Lock Street to see basically the outcomes of being targeted as black people. And he says that he sees in the arrival pictures bright people, smart people, tough people, adaptable people, people who didn't know what awaited them, but largely did what they intended to do when they bought their tickets. They made a better life for themselves and those of us who followed. And he sees a journey at its end and through the years that made this a better country. Their sweat and that of their descendants helped build the infrastructure, physical and social, the creativity infuses our politics, the industry, the arts, and the sport. He concludes that they face challenges, and today we see their descendants face challenges, and a country that still come to terms with its ambivalence, he says. He said, consider the Windrush matter, the dealing and then the subsequent management of that, the fact that, and many other issues around that. But he concludes that for today, take a moment, look at the picture, look at them, then look at Britain. Who knew that picture, that those people would change Britain? And that's the Windrush, and the ship that sailed from the Caribbean in 1948, 22nd June 1948, and docked at the Tilbury Docks in England in that time. Now, and so, long live the Windrush generation, and we thank you for everything you've done for all of us in every way, in terms of culture, economic improvement, infrastructure, national health system, music, art, politics, and social issues. Thank you, and thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening. We'll speak again. Bye.